Welcome executives to the 4th Annual Design Nation Conference and Business Today's first ever digital conference. As I mentioned before, this is the Building a Brand panel. And during the panel, we hope to explore a little bit about the various approaches that can be taken when building a brand, but more specifically, the individual approaches your company or firm takes to building that brand.
And a little bit about Julie and myself. I'm an incoming sophomore at Princeton University, and Julie's an incoming junior. This is both of our first years with Design Nation, and we're on the student outreach and student relations teams. So we oversaw all the applicants, trying to increase marketing for the conference, and obviously now we have the pleasure to speak with executives like yourselves. So thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon, whatever time zone you're in, and we hope this will be a really fun panel.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, just so we all have a better sense of what we're bringing to the panel? Phil, if you'd like to start us off, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Thanks for the intro. My name's Phil Delbourgo. I'm the Senior Vice President of Design at Vox Media, and where I oversee sort of like 3 aspects of design and on a cross-functional team: product design, brand design, and what we call revenue design, which is really support for our sponsors to do branded content and display ads. Prior to that, my career has been in media the whole time, and entertainment. I grew up in the cable world, and then I graduated to the digital world. So I've done multiple stints at Comedy Central, HBO, but the longest thing I did really was my time at VH1, overseeing their brand.
Great to meet you.
Yeah.
Tom, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I was just waiting for the cue, seeing who you were going to choose. Yeah, my name is Tom Tquish. I'm VP, head of design at Rightpoint, which is a Genpact company. We have been around for quite a while, and were acquired by Genpact late last year. We go to market as a global experience company, creating positive human interactions that drive meaningful business outcomes. I lead a team of designers across a variety of different disciplines. One of those disciplines being interactive design or interaction design, which is, I think, formerly been referred to as user experience. And that's why Ed Flynn is with us today. He's our interaction design lead. I also oversee product design, visual design, and then motion design within Rightpoint. Similarly, I cut my teeth at small boutique kind of design firms back in the day, working on branding initiatives, and fell in love with digital as brands were starting to try and figure out, as they were working through kind of brand positioning, how they were going to position themselves within the digital space as that was kind of emerging. And so I kind of quickly adopted that channel as a focus for myself, and have kind of gone the digital path, the rest of my career. And that's kind of what brings me here today, is sort of how do we enable brands within sort of the digital channel and create experiences that resonate with consumers and employees to ensure that the brand sort of vision is articulated across.
That's awesome. Oliver?
Hi, I'm Oliver Maltby, Executive Creative Director here at Interbrand, New York. So, short bio. So I kind of, I left university not really knowing what I wanted to do. I think it was graphic design or potentially advertising, actually. I got offered a few opportunities to go into advertising, and I kind of turned them down because I wanted to specifically focus on more kind of ideas-based work. So I actually went to work for a very small boutique awards-driven agency in the middle of England. And then from there, I then moved to London and created, like a new design agency. I was the first employee for another agency, and we quickly came, internationally recognized in creative awards. We worked with lots of different industries like telcos and things like that. And then off the back of that, I went back to my original company, but to head up the London office at the age of 28. And I ran that office successfully for 4 or 5 years. And in that time, we became the most creatively awarded agency in the world. So we beat Apple, we beat AKQA, everybody. Pure fluke, but we did it. And then off the back of that, a few of my ex-colleagues actually went to Interbrand Australia in Sydney to start, and they were doing some incredible work there. And then I got the opportunity to go and move to Interbrand in Melbourne. I did that for a year and a half, and then actually transferred to Sydney, and I was there a year and a half where I was lucky enough to lead the rebrand of Sydney Opera House. I left Australia way too early, which is a whole other story. And went back to the UK to have children. We actually fell pregnant, but we were bored going back to our old lives. And then we got an opportunity to move to New York. So I've been in New York the last 4 years with Interbrand here. So that's it.
And David?
I don't know which direction I should go. Oliver's direction, like bottom up, or everyone else's top. I don't. Okay, so I'll go the original way. So I'm a founder of a company here in New York called Hush, H-U-S-H. We're a design agency, and we focus on experiences, and that word really sucks. But what we mean is we actually mix architecture, brand, and technology. So we build real world places that people go, that brands want to make or create for their customers or audiences or partners. Some of them are B2B, some of them B2C. Some of them are very public and artistic, but they always kind of mix those three things: space, technology, and obviously this conversation about why that's positioned strategically for a brand message. Most of our clients are big tech, so Facebook, Google, Uber, LinkedIn, but we do a lot of real estate too, big real estate, kind of big, gnarly, scary New York real estate, and some other more fun ones in London. We're small, we're only about 25 people, with some freelancers, flex up and down, but we've been around for 13 years. So going back, I went to a art center, College of Design in LA. And then the program I was in there was very multidisciplinary, and in retrospect, it actually is a kind of a similar model to the company we have now, and that wasn't intentional. I guess that was just not, it was grown from that soil. But when I left school, I went right into digital work. I was working for digital agencies doing websites back in the day. I was also doing a lot of motion graphics. I became a commercial director for several years, where I did a lot of like motion graphics and live action driven spots. And then kind of settled back and wanted to make things that exist in the real world, not just in rectangles. So I started the company, and we kind of grew that over time, piece by piece by piece. That's it.
Is it more cubes than rectangles now then?
Exactly. We just added a dimension. That's all. It's that simple. Yeah. I'm probably the least brand, like when you guys speak about brand, all of you are such experts at brand and branding, and we're kind of experts in extending the brands that you all create to figure out how they articulate themselves in the real world. So I think that's maybe how I'll answer these questions.
Perfect. Well, it's so nice to have such a wide array of experiences. And yeah, we're just going to start with some general questions before moving into a couple more executive specific questions. And the first question I kind of want to start with, because I think it's one of the biggest considerations when creating any kind of brand strategy. And I know that companies often approach branding companies or agencies with the expectation that having a strong brand will drive their business outcomes. And so I want to ask, what is it like managing both the creative side and the business side when building a brand? So David, if you actually want to start.
Cool. I'm probably the least qualified to answer, but I'm going to go. Well, I mean, I think the short story is, right, like, I actually have an economics degree, totally weird. So I naturally see this world as not just pure design and artistry. I see it in the context of business all the time, almost problematically, I think sometimes. So the idea that you can separate the two feels very strange for me. And it's really hard to get down to a micro level where you could really analyze what moves you're making that are purely about brand and position, and what are really about a business case. I think what I like to think about is when you're an hour in or a day into briefing your team and they're starting to work on a project, the questions they're going to start asking you are really business case questions. And if you don't have that position and clarity, the creativity is just stylistic.
Phil?
I'm on mute. I would echo a lot of what David said. You know, as I think I'm the only person here who works within a corporate environment as opposed to an agency, or, you know, and so I'm not going to repeat, you know, kind of things I wholeheartedly agree with what David said, but really like kind of the role you end up playing in an organization. And I probably didn't explain enough what Vox Media is. We're a collection of journalistic websites, Vox being the sort of flagship news site. We also own The Verge, Eater, Curbed, and the New York Magazine portfolio of brands. So, you know, we're content creators and storytellers. But the important thing about that business lens is that when you find yourself in a situation like working inside of a company where business outcomes are the vocabulary of most of the people there, you have to act as kind of a translator between business needs and creative culture. And I think that role is something that I've played most of my career, and just kind of designers really having a curiosity about the business really helps speed up that dialogue. But, you know, you have to remember creative is often very intimidating to folks who are outside of the creative world, and they need help communicating their needs and the outcomes that they want. And you need to be able to, as a designer, connect your solutions to what their stated goals are. And that process of translation kind of goes both ways, like teaching your designers to understand like the business vernacular and helping make non-creatives feel very comfortable in the discussion about design, so it's not like an intimidating thing.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And yeah, I'd echo what David and Phil have already said. I think that idea of curiosity definitely plays into it. I think we have kind of a separate practice that is business design. And so, you know, the idea of research and really understanding consumers and employees, depending on the engagement, understanding the organization and how it operates internally is a part of sort of our process, you know, gaining that sort of empathy for the audiences that we'll be communicating with and helping to kind of create experiences for. So I think, you know, while we have sort of researchers that are going down that path, we also have designers who are learning the business as we're, you know, interacting and workshopping with the clients. And so I think, you know, that's what we really sort of pride ourselves on, is really gaining that empathy for not only the end consumer, but for the organization.
And Oliver?
Do you want us to jump in on each other, or do you just want to like do it in sequence every time, just so I know?
I think we could do a nice middle. I think I was just trying to make sure that the flow of the conversation wasn't too.
So the question is, how does business interact with design, right? And how does the finance come into making creative decisions? Okay, that's a very, very expansive question. So I realized what I said is I gave you like my backstory, but I didn't really tell you about my role at Interbrand right now. So I kind of oversee with my partner. So the way Interbrand's set up in New York is it's split into essentially two big portfolios with roughly 30 to 35 people in, plus or give or take freelancers. So it's not a dissimilar size to like say David or anything like that really. It's just there's just more of us, you know, more pockets. And my role is like a creative lead, and then there's a business lead. So we literally have two people at the top of the apex within that portfolio that represents both of those sides. And then underneath us, there's a kind of there's 4 or 5 different disciplines. So we have the main ones are strategy, design, analytics, which is obviously more specific to like business and finance, and then client managers or client services. And then we have a few kind of stragglers like like motion design and different kinds of research functionality that sits within it. And then separate to that, so we are, as Interbrand, especially in New York, because I've had different experiences at different offices, we're incredibly driven by like business outcomes, even more so than I'd like at times, because I think it does have an effect. Like you can definitely swing one way or another, in an industry. And I think a lot of our role is to really give our clients confidence to move forward with decisions, because what happens is, especially when you work with companies at scale, and like it doesn't get bigger than America. Like it really doesn't. Like some of these companies we work with are ginormous billion-dollar companies, and they might be wrestling with a decision for years that you might think is a really simple thing. Very much like the endorsement of what's it called? Is it GenPoint? As an example, like one company endorsing another company when they create a merger, that could be a year-long work stream with over 100 people involved just to make that decision. So, and all of those things have to be backed up with financial data when possible, with a lot of research, whether that be qual or quant, just to get enough group or enough momentum behind one thing happening. So like from where I've worked in the world, like I've almost gone from small boutique to kind of mid-ground in Australia, where like it's such a new country still, that there isn't like those kind of years of kind of just layers of kind of bureaucracy built on top of it. Whereas if you go to America, it's so big, and the organizations we deal with specifically are so big. Our role is really to kind of help them through a process a lot of the time. So it's intrinsically linked.
Yeah, I would say that there's also a lot of perception management that has to happen through this process. On my side, on the interaction design side, we're trying to always figure out how to find that blend between what the user needs to achieve and their perception of how a brand can or cannot help them achieve that goal. And then it's also the vice versa. It's how the brand perceives how users and consumers actually interpret the messages that come out from that brand strategy. Mm-hmm. So we spend a lot of time on the interaction side trying to find find that balance point, but really also to be that bridge for them.
Yeah,
a really good point.
I think it's interesting when you think about when you think about all of our roles, like all of us, I'm sure we all answer to different masters essentially within a large organization. And that might be really high up in the stack or more tactical. And that doesn't mean one's more important than another, because if you're more tactical, you might actually have more influence on the product that the client, the consumers see. Whereas if you're like higher up, it might be more academic, and you might drive the business in a direction, but then claim less ownership of what gets developed as well. So they're all very different in terms of necessarily who we all answer to. So for instance, we generally answer to CMOs and CEOs, depending on the size of the business. But that means we generally have a brand and marketing lens on it. But then, for instance, if there's a CTO or CIO, then it might be that we don't get to play in a certain area. So I think it really depends on, what your business delivers, and therefore who you answer to, and therefore what impact you can have on a company.
I was going to say, there is sometimes that there is this push and pull between business outcome, desired business outcomes and KPIs, and advocacy for the user. Like what's good for the business isn't necessarily the best thing for the user, and designers are trained to think about the user and advocate for that as like a North Star. So sometimes, I'm back to like Ed's point, like just trying to find that balance where articulating the conflicts and understanding them is another part of the role.
Yeah, I think just to build on what David had said earlier around kind of his role in all this is to extend the brand. I think, that it's similar in our sort of world. Our role is really as a key enabler for an overall brand experience via sort of helping to impact a customer experience, whether that's kind of pacing them through sort of a conversion journey or something more sort of tangible, or even an employee experience. So we do a lot of work to kind of allow organizations to work together and collaborate more efficiently and effectively. through service design and other kind of mechanisms that enable that to happen. And so, you know, as a byproduct of a better employee experience is ideally a better customer experience. And so again, that's where I think it's critical for us as designers to understand the business so that we can really sort of understand how that business operates and facilitates and makes money so that we can drive value through, you know, gaining efficiencies in processes.
Absolutely. What a great start. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the thing, you know, the conversation that happens forever and will continue to happen forever that I find interesting is, you know, designers, I think, are natural in thinking about the why, and the why often just comes back to like these kind of performance tests. You know, they're what are they? What is it doing? What needle is it moving? Is it moving the needle of the whole entire business by repositioning it, or is it moving the needle of a particular digital platform in a better way and more usability? So I think it's kind of baked into the education and just the way of thinking. But what's fascinating to me and keeps me thinking still is, you know, different types of design, different scales, different areas are all held to different standards of quantitative versus qualitative benchmarking. And on both of the poles, you kind of fail, right? If you're purely rooted in qualitative, you lose a lot of battles, especially when it comes to money and efficacy, and if it goes up to the C-suite. As Oliver was mentioning, you know, the language at that level is really quantitative, right? And so no matter how much you know in your heart of hearts that X is better than Y, because you know it's just better design, it's just better for all the reasons you feel, it ultimately falls down if you don't have some kind of quantitative and business rationale behind it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you know, if you really can kill the spirit of design and creativity if you hold it to standards that are so rigorously quantitative, which I see happening in San Francisco and the Bay Area all the time. The design paradigm there is like, it's purely quantitative. It's like ruthlessly UI quantitative, like A/B tested to death. And it's almost like the spirit of design has been killed and put into little rectangles and boxes that either perform better or worse, and it's a constant branching decision tree until the data tells you that this is better than that. So I don't know, I think we all exist in little bits of that world where we have to kind of pitter patter between these two poles. But I think knowing what moment you're in along the way, are you in a quantitative moment where you really have to lean into showing what it's doing and how it's performing? Or are you in a way where you can generate spirit and feel and show and tell and get people to fall in love with an idea that's quite intangible, but you can just feel it, is like the key of the whole industry. It's like how you do the little dance and you move, and it's what you show and what you don't and how you put it all together. I think that's kind of what keeps me going in this industry in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I often say that, you know, quantitative is going to give you a start, but qualitative is going to give you the story that you need to really bring something to life. You have to have both of those.
Yeah, I think it just
Absolutely.
It's horrible, and we shouldn't talk about finance constantly because that's not the most inspiring thing in the world. But like, it comes down to like big business decisions have to be backed up fundamentally, because there's a lot of scared people who are connected to branding, connected to design, but don't fundamentally understand the decisions they're making, and they need help and support in making those decisions and feeling confident about them. And that's part of what probably some of us have to do on a regular basis.
Okay, I think that was a great start for our first question. This is a little bit more big picture, but I just wanted to ask, how would you distinguish building a domestic versus a global brand in terms of strategy, design, etc.? Oliver, if you wanted to start us off.
Oh God, thanks. So I would say, and this is only purely from my experience, like from what I've witnessed, I think global brands only happen when essentially all of the branding function and decision is handled in-house. I think when it's external, or if it's, and especially when it's like it has to be almost like a digitally native company, so it can act global from the start. I think when there was like a historical bricks and mortar element of the business, there's already power bases that are developed around the world, and although they might share the same logo, they tend to be very different businesses and very different organizations. So there is a challenge to the idea of a global business, because I think, you know, like you know, organizations are global, but I think they act differently in different locations and different environments. So we even work with, like, you know, we could work with the US arm of a global organization, but then they might be HQ'd in Japan, for instance, and therefore we'd have a Japan team working with them, and we wouldn't necessarily be working in lockstep necessarily, because that's not the way that we are, you know, connecting with the businesses. That's not how they're asking us to connect. So I think the idea of global businesses is actually really challenging unless you can really contain and manage it internally yourself, and it's almost, the business was started with that in mind. I think otherwise there's always that tension, because fundamentally power bases develop around the world, and it's very hard to start breaking those silos down.
Absolutely. David, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, David.
I mean, I think, yeah, it's very. I agree. It's a timing kind of idea, and where this business started and what its root is. But it's also, you know, I wonder anyone building a brand today. I mean, from scratch, not rebranding or repositioning. Like, I wonder anyone who would consider from the outset that this isn't a global. Everything's global all the time. And, you know, you see that when you travel, right? It's like everything looks the same. It's so boring. And that's because we're so connected. So the idea of like starting a brand from scratch right now feels like it's really global by necessity. I mean, there are tactical pieces of it that make that effectively more difficult, and language barriers and those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, I guess the case study I can talk about is really like we work with Facebook a lot, and you know, they're the globaliest of global brands. I mean, that's their brand, right? Is everyone all over the place all the time together at one. So you know, but you see how that falls down pretty quickly, right? You see how it has to move much more past a bunch of emojis and flags and skin tones and language translations, and really has to think about how it's operating in different societies under different governmental rules and different political environments. And that's where the complexity, I think, is pretty fascinating, actually, to think about. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I would maybe question your question, which is, does a local brand really exist at any scale? I mean, sure, there's a dog store down the street that sells dog treats, and they're pretty local, but you know, at the level we're talking about in discourse.
I think there is. I mean, I think from a business perspective, I agree with you, David. But I think from a brand story perspective, there's another dimension. So, you know, to the degree, what is the intent of the brand? What is the context? Like IKEA, for example, it's a global brand, but where it comes from is really part of their brand story. And whereas McDonald's, you could argue the same thing. So it's you know, there's this idea of local also being like super important. And these can be global brands, but it's like a local micro-brewed beer from a very specific area needs to strongly identify with that area to be successful. So some brands have to erase that distinction and truly be agnostic, even though their product offering can be tailored to a specific market. I would say like McDonald's is a perfect example. Like their menus are different, whether you go to Japan or France. So they consider the local market, but the brand is consistent across globally. Netflix is probably another good example of that. So I think really understanding those push and pull variables, digging into the brand story if you're creating a brand. But I would agree with you that there is no such thing. Like, we live in a multicultural society, and even if you plan to do business only in the United States, you still have to go through certain filters when creating a brand to make sure it's appropriate and you're not going to offend anybody. So there is like a think globally hat that always has to be worn. But like understanding the context of like where the brand is, where it comes from, what its story is, are all like different variables that I would consider.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go, I think we've talked very high level, which is great. I'll go very tactical just to show and like the opposite side of the coin. I think just a couple things come to mind. Like as a, again, experience driven company, again, it's a horrible word, but we're going to continue to use it. I think you know, we've crafted experiences that marketers can deploy within different regions, within, you know, global corporations. And I think you know, part of it is being sensitive, again, to the cultural cues and the norms within the different markets, enabling those marketers to kind of deploy those things that make the most sense for those markets to be able to tell that brand story or reinforce that sort of brand vision. And so again, it's just being able to communicate, collaborate, and work with all those different groups to ensure that, you know, the entire system is built to accommodate all those different sort of touch points. I think a case study from a fast fashion brand that we were sort of helping roll out a global sort of commerce platform for. I think, you know, there were different things that we needed to be mindful of in the Asia Pac market, different extensions of the brand that hadn't been really discussed or thought about in the US or European markets. Things like cash on delivery as a, you know, just a tactic, but, you know, what does that look like then as the brand, you know, doesn't have a storefront face that, you know, we were used to in the US or in the European market. So now you've got this sort of secondary entity that is, you know, meant to be the face of the brand upon delivery and kind of receiving the transaction. So how do you kind of enable a better brand moment within those instances? And how do you own that in some cases or let it go in other cases and sort of just, you know, embrace that sort of dynamic?
Amazing. Okay, so for this next question, I want to consider how going digital has become increasingly important. So in what ways have your company or firm had to adapt different brand strategies to consider emerging social media platforms? And Tom can actually start this one.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I think going digital to me is more than adopting, you know, social media sort of best practice or you know, playing in those spaces. I honestly, I think that might be a better question just from a publisher side to just hear a little bit more about that. But in terms of kind of embracing digital and ensuring that organizations succeed, you know, I think it's all about sort of helping establish that notion of innovation within organizations. And so I think, you know, that adaptability and that countless and sort of ability to continue to innovate and create experiences within new platforms is what we sort of tout. But I mean, be curious to hear sort of from another perspective what that looks like around the social media thing in particular.
Oliver?
Well, we don't do social media, so it's going to be hard for me to answer that specifically. But so I think the challenge is like I mentioned before in terms of like where we sit in the stack. Like we sit like relatively far away from, I would say, like consumers necessarily, but we have different ways of kind of gaining intelligence from them. So one is like all the different research functions we do. So like, you know, qual, quant, and like kind of traditional analytics. And then we also have, our CEO is a joint CEO. So we have a sister company called C-Space. So C-Space do like really innovative like consumer panels and communities. So we can get in-depth knowledge from different members of the public and like really specific, like granular, like, you know, sourcing and screening the right people to get the right illicit responses. And then we can use them either to get intelligence at the front or test kind of, you know, brand strategies or product development along the way. In terms of actual digital, like a lot of the work we do is really setting a vision for a company. So we don't necessarily go towards more kind of the day-to-day communications and, you know, like marketing plans and things like that. We do like content plans for them, but that's about as far as we get. We don't really get into the details of like which platform, what time, what message, things like that. So that's just not what I can't really give you any insight there, unfortunately.
I think, you know, from kind of going back to what Tom was saying, if we take it up just a level from social media, I think the big thing that from a brand strategy perspective, when you get into digital, is that you have to start thinking about the elasticity of the brand and how malleable that sort of vision, tone of voice, you know, the foundation of it can be. To digital moves in a lot of different directions really fast. So you have to, and the problems that Tom and I usually have to solve are, how do we add a new dimension or increase that dimensionality of that brand strategy to be able to take the best advantage of whatever platform is, you know, relevant and moving sort of up the value chain for users. So thinking about it from that elastic perspective, you know, we often think of, you know, good brand strategies as sort of a coat rack. We're constantly adding coats to that coat rack in digital. So that's a really important aspect that they have to kind of hold central.
I think, you know, I might be one of the only people here who really works for like a digitally native brand. So, you know, so kind of at Vox Media, digital is everything. There is no, you know, adaptation to digital, except that it's always changing. But I think one of the challenges is really all the different touch points your brand will show up in, and that you don't have control over. So, you know, where the user doesn't even know they're interacting with your brand. They're interacting with a piece of content on Apple News, and there's a little tiny logo in the corner that says Vox. And so being conscious of that breadcrumb trail and owning as much of it as possible, and then understanding the different user behavior on the different social media platforms. You know, there is no one size fits all piece of content that works across all social media. So if you know, obviously Instagram is a very visual medium. Facebook is different. So you have to like, you know, you have to like repurpose content or customize content to the specific social media platforms, and always make sure that you're, you know, within the constraints of that platform. Like Facebook has text and visual constraints on a post. You know, you have to be very clever about leaving as much brand DNA in behind so that the user knows that they're interacting with you. And that's the big challenge. And then, you know, 6 months later, the algorithm changes and you have to do it completely differently. So always adapting to the constant change in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, that plays to the idea of the innovative mindset and being able to be nimble and adapt and try things that aren't going to, you know, create brand confusion, but also be willing to sort of cut those things off at the pass if they're not gaining traction. I think the idea of ownability is really interesting in terms of kind of this dispersed kind of brand presence that we face today. I think Nike is a really great example. You know, having pulled out of Amazon as a kind of outlet for, you know, selling their product and really embracing the idea of owning their own sort of, you know, ecosystem and commerce ecosystem. I think that was a huge brand strategy decision that they made to ensure that they had sort of full control over how users and consumers were, you know, purchasing and experiencing the brand. So I think, you know, those are interesting touch points, not social specifically, but as new channels evolve, you know, which channels you choose to participate within and which channels you kind of walk away from to ensure that you can create that, you know, brand presence that is relevant to your brand.
And David?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been conscious not to add things if they don't need to be added. So I'm going to keep it very short. I mean, we do no social at all. I can't stand it and wouldn't ever want to do it. So we don't. But what is interesting, and maybe this is an interesting thought, is you know, we work for some of the companies that are the biggest social companies in the world. And so what I've found interesting, and this kind of connects to Phil's point a little bit about the way brand is diminished as it's transposed platform to platform to platform. I would challenge you to think that Instagram's brand is not a little gradient symbol with a camera. Instagram brand is the application. And so I think something very interesting is happening with branding, in the sense that branding once was the bastion of the identity in the system. But in the last 10 years, we've seen the biggest, most visible companies in the world rise out of a rectangle that you have in your pocket. And frankly, my relationship to the Instagram brand is less about what it stands for, because maybe us on this call can tell you what Instagram's kind of maybe tagline and positioning is, because we're in this industry, but no one else can tell you that. All they think about is the rectangle, the functionality, and frankly, the physical, the psychological and physical experience of scroll. And that in total is actually the brand. So I think with big tech and big digital platforms, or like an Uber, we also work with, same thing. My perception of Uber is not the complex ecosystem about moving things and people to create opportunity, food, bikes, scooters, and cars. It's actually about the instantaneous and the UX of that application. And that to me is the brand. So I don't know, I kind of think brand is evolving a little bit when it comes to really hardcore and large digital platforms, like the way we perceive it.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, I think the only thing is, it's like you're not wrong, but I would say to build on it is like brands are what they stand for, aren't they? So it's like, for instance, it's like enablement or community. Like Facebook's meant to be community, you know, like, or, you know, if you think of, you know, Amazon, you know, just being like always customer centric, like it's almost like they take that as a spirit and then apply that to different categories, you know, so it's almost like what the brand does for you, that's the thing. And in a very, you know, tactical sense, you know, Instagram, it is like the functionality and the kind of, you know, the pride or envy or lust or anger you feel when you're looking at it and feeling like you're connected, or, you know, envious, you know, but it's helping you feel connected to what your vision of the world is. I mean, I do worry about general social media and the way it, you know, it does become like a self-fulfilling echo chamber depending on what your interests are. You know, I worry about that, especially like if you think of like, even like, you know, American media versus like UK media or Australian media, like it's so polarizing. I really worry that people aren't getting a rich, you know, they're not seeing all the sides of any given story. They're just seeing the one they want to see generally. And I think social media does that in spades, which is for me is worrying. I don't know if I just went off on a tangent.
No, it's, I mean, I think, isn't it, we're supposed to have a dialogue. I think what's interesting is, I think we've all seen behind the curtains of how, I mean, like, I agree with you, Oliver, 100%, you know, like having the vision and the hierarchy and the stack and having a mission that everything, whatever it's applications, customers, new product lines, can all tap into, and people can understand why, the why of the company is the key. But it's so funny, you know, how many large companies have we all worked for, or big tech companies specifically, that have had to retroactively create that mission and vision? Uber did it 4 times. They finally kind of got it right with Wolf Olins, right? But like the genesis of a lot of these companies aren't actually what their mission is now. It was often kind of not the wonderfulest, truest, North Star, powerful ideas, you know? And so you see that sort of like shift in are we building this house from the top down and the ground up, and what's authentic about it. And that's why I was saying, a lot of these companies, even Google, you know, which was terribly designed and terribly branded for so long, and it's come a long way in 7, 8, 9 years. But, you know, no one cared about brand. They didn't care so bad that they put that terrible typeface and logo on a website. That's how much they didn't care. And then for years and hundreds of millions of dollars after that, they didn't care about brands still. Gods at Google were the product developers, the engineers, you know, and then they got to a scale where it's like, wow, actually the world needs to know what we stand for, and they need to interface with what we stand for in a much more organized way. And then you see what's come. Yeah. I mean, so I don't know, it's funny.
A few things like, I mean, Google specifically was incredibly mission driven from the start. They actually did have a lot of like brand, you know, purpose and mission. Even if they didn't call it that, they wrote it themselves and they believed in it. Like, don't be evil and things like that. Don't be evil, yeah. And I think with all of these, even Uber, like, you know, Uber was very clear from the start what it wanted to do. The problem is, it's just, I mean, it's not a problem. Businesses just change over time in terms of what their focus is.
Yeah.
So Uber's become more expansive, and therefore it has to talk about something beyond your private driver, because that's where it started, and now that's not what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's the role of branding is either kind of push or pull. It's like redefining what the business is today or defining what the business should be in the future. So I don't think it's a problem that brands change in time based on technologies and, you know, new categories opening up and things like that. I think that's what makes it interesting. Like, you know, like, are you, I think retrofitting's, it's not inaccurate, but I think it's also harsh language. Like, I think there's some truth in it, but then it's also like, it's actually just saying, like, you know, like, as you know, people change, like, and businesses change as well. So, and it's interesting whether you do it retroactively, you know, or you do it proactively to push a business in a certain direction as well.
Absolutely. Wow, we're really just going so in depth into all these questions. I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into each of you specifically. So we have an individualized question, but please feel free to make this as natural as possible and jump in if there's anything you'd like to add, even if I'm not asking a question specifically for you. So Phil, as a design leader at a media and entertainment brand, what is your unique approach to design compared to someone who produces a product?
Well, we do produce a product, but I understand where your question's coming from. You know, I've been in media for a really long time, and I've seen a lot of transformative change. As I started in the early days of, you know, cable TV, HBO, now publisher, after, you know, so there's the pre-internet and the post-internet part of that journey. I guess when I started, though, the big thing about being in media is you thought of instead of thinking of customers, you thought of audiences. And you were in this mindset of approaching that, you know, that end user with an effort to entertain. Whether you were doing marketing and promotion or you were, you know, purely creating the content, you had an insight that there was a way to communicate with that user in a way that they tell them a story. And that goes without saying. But what was interesting is in those days, if you were a packaged good brand or an entertainment brand, there was a big distance between the two. And over the years, you know, marketers have become cleverer, brands have become smarter, and they've learned to co-opt that idea of an audience. Their customer becomes an audience, and it kind of goes without saying today. So, you know, where I thought I had this like strategic advantage, and I used it when I worked at brand agencies to talk about this, you know, Red Bull is putting on concerts, and you know, just about every brand is thinking in terms of experience and storytelling. But that has been my North Star, and it holds true today. Even if that line has blurred, I always think in terms of engaging an audience and telling a story, as opposed to
I lost him. Did you hear him?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Back.
Oh, where did you lose me?
Right near the end, I think.
Oh, yeah, it was a soft landing. But no, I was just basically saying I've still never lost sight of that idea of an audience and of telling a story, even though it's become commonplace in the branding world. It's kind of where my roots are. I have incredible to tell about reality stars and celebrities, but it's for another day.
Right. Phil, I was curious, like, because you oversee 13 different publications, like, how do you treat all your children equally?
Well, we just inherited 6 of them recently. So I'm trying to wrap my head around that along with all the change that's going on right now in general. So we went through a merger in November with New York Magazine, and there's a print publication in there too, which is really interesting. With respect to our original portfolio, I mean, the job is to sort of work, you know, both corporately on the Vox Media brand, and also to help, you know, evolve the individual brands and be sort of like brand ambassadors for them. But they also have their own thing. The way I manage team brands is by taking the long view.
Cool.
So
Thank
my
you.
next question is for David. In creating these kind of like spatial consumer experiences, how are you able to successfully integrate content with technology at Hush?
Yeah, I think that's kind of core to what we do. Do you want to further define content, or do you want me to define it for myself?
I think you can define it for yourself, but I guess I was referring to like an individual company's brand or their main focus that they want to emphasize. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of one of our special sauces, I think, is, and I think it maybe reflects like why we work with the companies we do. You know, we work with specific companies who I think realize that technology at some level, and I'm using in the broadest sense, is so core to their brand. I don't mean it in, oh, we're Uber and we have to have an app to facilitate the thing. I mean that it's in their DNA. Like they think of themselves as an agile, iterative entity that is constantly changing to fulfill a mission. And that kind of technical sensibility doesn't exist across every product. I mean, many brands, even consumer, you know, packaged good, like everyone wants to be technically savvy and say, oh, we have this great, you know, but sometimes it's just, you know, sometimes it's just you're making cereal, you know, and it's like, it's okay. Like you just make the cereal. Maybe you make it in a really cool, technically rich process for cereal making, but you're still making cereal. So I think the companies we work with is they think of themselves with this technological heart that's beating. And so you think about how that sort of manifests itself. And when we build spaces, like we used to work with Nike a lot more than we do now. But you know, Nike before Nike ID and Nike.com was a huge platform, and you know, they still thought of themselves as a digital product company in the very way they deliver their physical products. And then they were obviously at the time making a lot of other digital products. They were making and failing with Fuel Band and making and failing with all these things. But their headspace was in like a digital technology. So what we did for that company is we would build like these crazy spaces where consumers would come to experience what Nike is, right? Nike is made to make you the most incredible athlete you can possibly be. And that could be making you faster than you've ever been before. So these kinds of big ideas about what it stands for are manifested through technology. So we integrate a lot of interesting technology, some of it which is Nike's, and some of it which is just interesting technology, because there's an affinity and a correlation between interesting creative technology experiences and what Nike is doing for their customers, right? And so that's how we do it. We take it, in some cases we said, oh, let's take the Nike Plus running data ecosystem and literally make a space that you can see every runner running in New York City at the same time. So you understand the scale and the power of that real-time community of runners. That's literally content brand merging with technology platform in a cool experiential way. But at the same time, we've done all sorts of other things where we've really not used anything that Nike actually makes, but we've just built a space that feels technologically rich. And Nike therefore identifies, or Nike consumers identify with Nike being technically forward, even if that's not the actual tech. So it's a Venn diagram of literal versus relational, but it's all the same. And I think that's why we fail miserably when we work with companies who are truly don't have a grasp of their technological DNA, you know?
The next question is for you, Oliver. Interbrand helps their clients make iconic moves to shift the industry's landscape and also drive unexpected change. What role does the customer play in this development of the iconic move, and how does Interbrand incorporate the customer in its work?
Yeah, I'll be relatively quick on this because I think I mentioned it earlier. Like, there's a few different ways, and every business is different, so it's hard to say that we have a cookie cutter approach because it depends on the organization, the scale, the budget, the time in place, like who the manager or owner of a project or work stream is. So everything's always different. But what we do have is obviously, like I said before, like research and analytics, but then we also have the sister agency of C-Space. So we put the kind of consumer-centered thought and ideas and likes and dislikes into almost every single project we do now in some way. I mean, I think we could always do more, and I think the challenge is I think it's a hard balance between taking insights or thoughts on a brand in the future or the difference between doing that and taking them verbatim or thinking about actually where you want to project the brand and where it wants to go in the future. Because if you ask customers, you know, what they necessarily want in the future, it might not be the right solution. You know, there's the old Ford quote of, you know, you can have any color car unless it's black. You know, if you ask customers would they want a car, they would have said no, a horse is fine. Like, there is some truth in that, like, and you have to balance like actually finding real insights versus just customer opinion. So that I think it's a you know, it's a balancing act all the time, and it's, you know, you can kind of be right and wrong at every single stage depending on how you take it. Specifically, if you're looking at data specifically to make a decision, like I think data should inform a decision. It shouldn't drive the decision. You know, I think I can't remember who mentioned it earlier. It might have been David or Tom talking about A/B testing. You know, like A/B testing, I think potentially it's not the death of an industry, but like it's definitely going to kind of homogenize just thought generally, which I don't necessarily think's the best way for a brand to stand out. I hope that answers it. I'm not sure.
Our final question is for Tom. So at Rightpoint, what are some ways you have been able to distinguish and empower brands in a retail versus digital space?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I don't know if I have a direct answer for you. I think retail versus digital, I think, yeah, I like to think of them as sort of one and the same. I think the idea of digital, again, being an enabler of a brand experience or a retail experience is something that we hold sort of near and dear to our hearts. I think at Rightpoint and even before Rightpoint, I've helped retailers kind of institute, you know, in-store kiosks or immersive experiences that help to tell a larger product story to ensure that customers feel like they are sort of more informed and confident of the, you know, purchase decision they're about to make. And so again, as an enabling force for a brand, not necessarily the overarching sort of brand strategy, but helping to represent the brand in those formats. I think you know, today it's interesting. We're doing a lot of work with brands that are retail focused in integrating sort of, you know, buy online, pick up, curbside sort of processes and enabling that sort of behavior to, again, allow the customer to self-service, to allow them to engage with a brand in a different way than was needed previously. So I think it's more about, you know, how we allow customers to not only kind of find and fall in love with the products that the retailer might be offering, but also feeling confident in, you know, the decision that they're making and providing content to help unfold that product story and really sort of immerse that customer in the benefits of the engagement they're having with the brand.
Yeah, and I think one other aspect to that is just from a digital standpoint, how personalization comes into play, and how that affects the brand experience and the conversation between the brand and the customer. Both, you know, when you go to a retail environment, you're able to actually have a conversation with an employee and have that sort of back and forth interaction. We're using personalization as a way to sort of have those similar conversations in a digital capacity in these retail scenarios.
So our final question, just to close off this panel, is what is some advice that you can give student creatives who are looking to go into brand strategy? And are there any specific skills that you found especially important through your years of experience? Phil, if you wanted to start us off.
I feel like I'm the car here. First. I think it's really about adaptation to change. Can you hear me? Yeah. The industry just moves so fast. The mediums move fast. The practice moves fast. The tools move fast. So, you know, always what you're signing up for is like a lifetime of constant education and relearning and open-mindedness, and not getting too set in your ways. I think just, you know, staying curious, watching the world change and leaning into that change versus resisting. It's probably my best advice.
Tom?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that adaptability is a good one. I think I would add on, you know, that idea of curiosity, which maybe parlays, you know, some of that adaptability. I think it was referenced earlier, just, you know, that innate sort of desire to learn new things and just to be curious about, you know, an organization, as, you know, bizarre as the organization might seem to you as a designer, you know, how can you ensure that you're gaining an understanding of how they operate and how you can help them operate and you know, present their brand more effectively. Passion, just, you know, plays alongside of the curiosity thing as well. Just being passionate about diving in and figuring things out as you go. And then attention to craftsmanship and understanding of sort of how to do the thing and how to own that craft and really communicate effectively within digital, verbal, or any other sort of means.
Yeah, and I would jump in on we've had a couple points today about, you know, A/B testing and data. And I think one of the most important things is it's not enough to just ask the questions. You have to learn how to ask the right questions, because if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to actually get the right data that's going to point you in a direction that's actually valuable. So really honing your craft at how to elicit the information that's actually useful for you in building a brand strategy is extremely important.
And I'll build one more build on that is collaboration, being able to kind of understand sort of how to function within a multidisciplinary team and ask the right questions to the right people and ask help from the right people that can, you know, again, extend your knowledge, but also help shape something in a way that you might not thought possible.
Oliver?
Well, I think we've got most, but the only one, the one that stood out to me was communication skills. And it sounds really obvious, but like, you've got to be able to write well, you've got to be able to articulate enough so that people understand the meaning of something. Because a lot of things we talk about obviously aren't created yet. So you have to be able to paint a vision of what the thing is that you want to drive everyone towards and then bring everyone with you. And I think specifically for designers, I don't know if that was a question that was specific to strategists, if they're going to strategy, but for designers, I think what I see a lot of is designers don't think it's their responsibility to write. They think it's somebody else's. And I think that is never the case. And if you do that, you're going to end up in a cul-de-sac. But you have to be able to, like, creativity isn't just visual, it's visual, verbal, it's all the senses. And if you're not focusing on all of them, then it's going to affect your career in some way.
Yeah, you're going to make a lot of decks.
Yeah. And I hear you with asking the right questions. That is a very current pain point for me right this week. So you're completely accurate there.
I want to fit something in that doesn't that is new, because I agree. I guess I'm going to take, the idea of a brand strategist or brand strategy. I guess, designers can do brand strategy and strategists can understand design, but there is a role called a brand strategist, and you do specific brand strategy. And I think that feels like it's a very interesting role in which, you have to really understand the aesthetic landscape and contemporary semiotics and like what the visual world is and how people are speaking to people in the world through the lens of brands. So you need to understand design. You may not need to be the best designer in the world, but you really need to understand how things are articulated and the difference in meaning. So it's a semiotics kind of problem. And then you really need to have like a research bent and just a hunger for knowledge. And you need to be, I can't tell you how much of my day is talking about references. We did it on this call. Like we spent 50% of the time talking about things we did and saw, and then remember and this. And so like just a voracious appetite to understand and dig and look and be collecting things you see and lines of copy and interesting things that a company did and shifts in businesses and match that with the whole aesthetic landscape so you feel like you have your finger on the pulse of what is happening and why. I think it's a pretty beautiful place to occupy your time if you can really feel like you can dive into both those worlds and be that bridge, because I think it's a very important part of the process.
Amazing. So that's a wrap on this panel. I just want to thank you guys all so much for taking up the time to be a part of this panel and for also sharing so many of your personal experiences and industry knowledge. I know that this has been such a great conversation for both of us, and we're really excited to share it with all of the Design Nation participants. Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Good to meet everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you guys too.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.